Perfect. I think we're ready.
All right, recording is started.
Okay, someone will tell me when to start.
Yeah, so I will just stop your screen share for a second, Peter, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I'll just quickly I'm now screen sharing. So are you guys seeing the flyer?
Yes.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. Thank you very, very much to our participants. We have an esteemed panel of participants in this very important symposium and topic of humanitarian plastic surgery. Thank you, Horatio, for your support, and Jennifer at the ICOPLAST office. As you know, ICOPLAST is the International Confederation of Plastic Surgery Societies, and one of our main value added or ways of adding value for our members is education. And this is our first symposium organized through the Oceania branch from the South Pacific and Australia, New Zealand, and our affiliated work together with the Pacific Islands. I myself have had a really valuable interaction through ICOPLAST and through Interplast with humanitarian work that we've been doing with our Pacific Island colleagues. We have an esteemed panel. Unfortunately, Professor Korlu couldn't make it today, but Peter Nthumba from Kenya has gracefully at short notice offered his services, and Peter is a rural plastic surgeon in Kenya, highly respected and widely published on the topic of humanitarian plastic surgery, and is also an associate professor at Vanderbilt University in the United States. And Professor Corstiaan Breugem is the CEO of Interplast Netherlands, and is also the head of the pediatric plastic surgery unit at Amsterdam University Medical Center, and also president of the Dutch Cleft Palate Craniofacial Association. So we'll kick off with those first two presentations by Peter and Corstiaan, and then Horatio will introduce our other speakers, Cameron Glover and Samesa Mataniak. Sorry, Samesa, I always have trouble with your last name. Matanaikake Jr. From Fiji. Each presentation will take roughly 30 to 45 minutes. And then we'll round up with what I think will be a really stimulating Q&A and discussion afterwards. We have some very important questions to address. And I think we have the perfect panel together today to address those issues. Mainly, do we actually add value or do we subtract value? And how can we make sure that the humanitarian work we're doing is sustainable, and what is actually the optimal business model in the current world climate? Now, Peter, I think we're ready for your presentation. So I think you'd be free to share your screen. Do you want to see how if that works out?
Yes, let's see. Looks like that's okay. I need to get. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So I'd like to thank Professor Scott Collier and Miko for the invitation to participate. When Prof. Collier said late, I just didn't realize what he meant, but since I'd made the commitment and he wasn't going to be able to, here we are. So good morning, everybody. Thank you. Humanitarian plastic surgery. I thought I'd just present my own view as a low and middle income country surgeon. Most of my experience, of course, is from Africa. I am also a clinical epidemiologist, and I just want to start with a statement that I'll bring up later from my mentor, and my hope and dream for global plastic surgery, suddenly for global surgery, would be high-income countries telling us, LMICs, you don't need us anymore. And I've got a little icon there on each. This is a little group that we got together and trying to get young African surgeons interested in research so that we can move this agenda forward. So this is where I work. AIC Kijabe Hospital is in the escarpment of the Great Rift Valley. In the bottom, that's the valley, and above us would be the top of the rift. And that's just my family on a trip away from the hospital. Behind there is Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest, one of the few places with snow in Africa. I'd like to just present a few conflicts of interest, a bit primarily my personal bias, and I'll try and bring in some science, but I'll bring it a lot of it is from my perspective of what I think we ought to look at as a community. But global surgery must address the surgical ecosystem for progress on the burden of surgical disease in LMICs to be made. I would argue that resources are available, both human and finance, to begin the process of meeting this challenge. I think they just need to be redistributed. I'd also make the statement that health for all is wealth for all. And I think that global surgery can certainly meet that challenge. Global partnerships need to involve both surgical professional bodies and ministries of health. Ministries of health have red tape. Professional bodies will bring in the finesse of professionalism and be able to hold their ministries accountable. Academic global surgery is, in my view, the vehicle for the future of global surgery if we want to succeed. Short-term mission trips need to morph into academic global surgery programs, because I think in their current format, they have outlived their time. The term global surgery has unified a number of terms used to describe aspects of humanitarian surgical missions, primarily conducted by volunteers from high-income countries within LMICs, whether it is in time of war, natural disasters, or peacetime. In the strictest forms, most of these missions would fall under the short-term mission trips tag. STMTs have undoubtedly achieved a lot in terms of total number of individuals accessing surgical care. And there are a lot of success stories, mostly individuals that have benefited from this process. They have a number of advantages, including quick benefits. The number of patients can be attended to is easily and quickly. In fact, the biggest, the one outcome measure that is used in STMTs is numbers. Fairly easy to arrange. There's minimal red tape. Costs of individual missions usually manageable because you can find donors. volunteers can schedule time for the trip easily because they arrange it around their work schedules. This may not sound like an advantage, but it is. There are no controls largely because there's no oversight body, no restrictions. They're mostly left to self-regulations. There's no requirement for reports, outcomes, and they're largely opaque and making it easy to plan and execute. They're usually driven by high-income country groups, individuals whose interests, goals, pathways, endpoints, if any, are all determined by that team. They look for funding. If they perform research, they are responsible for the research agenda. And if they include LMIC participants, that is surgeons, usually a token contribution, a token author, usually. Not the rule, but by and large. Sustainability of any gains is not usually a goal of most of these trips, leading to repeat visits with dependency created within the community, as well as a tension between local health providers and visitors. The actual costs are significant. It is expensive to ship volunteers and equipment in and out of the hospital where they'd be working, provide accommodation for these volunteers, and may actually cost a lot more than the surgeries performed themselves. This just happened, this is Saturday, but this was Friday night. This is the largest slum in Sub-Saharan Africa, maybe in LMICs, and you know, a surgeon might ask what surgical needs do these people need. An epidemiologist will look at it differently, because perhaps their most immediate need is water, sanitation. They do have surgical needs, but those are not necessarily the biggest problems. Most governments, like I've intimated, are quite happy to have others take care of the health of their own people. And the sheer number of short-term mission trips makes any coordination impossible, with few teams coordinating their activities. You can find 2 or 3 short-term missions within the same area. Local institutions may be overwhelmed by visits, while with their own schedule disrupted, and post-op care of unfamiliar, often complex surgical cases, complications become difficult to manage, as many will have to wait for the next visit. And so I just quote this from a previous paper I've written on surgical blitzes, which is the equivalent of short-term mission trips, and as well as surgical airlifts to hospitals in developed countries have all been used for many years, standing at 2 opposing ends, both providing care that is may otherwise be lacking locally, but none providing any lasting solutions to communities. They basically serve individuals. You know, in terms of how can we solve the issues that bedevil global surgery, it needs a global face, not just token invitations to the table for LMIC participants. If there is a true selfless interest in improving surgical access in LMICs, then the agenda needs to be set up by the with the active participation of LMIC partners. They need to detail their needs, not receive prescriptions on what, how, and when. Most people here may remember the SAPS structural adjustment programs that were prescribed by the World Bank in the 90s that led to the collapse of economies and health institutions in LMICs. It certainly, we're still recovering from that. I'm not sure that we will. And then the other important statement I'd make is global standards must be applied when seeking solutions. The LMIC burden of surgical disease is the result of a myriad of systemic problems, and so there can be no quick solution. Nice comforting terms used in global surgery include task shifting and task sharing, and there have been studies about their ability to solve problems, but they need to be thought out clearly. This will become parts of the systems that we create, and if mistakes are made now, they will be difficult, if not impossible, to undo in the future. We must ensure that the care provided is both safe and quality. We must be comfortable receiving care from those that we entrust to provide surgical care before we prescribe them to others. So if I am going to be comfortable with someone providing surgical care to a rural population because there is no surgeon around, I must be comfortable when going to that hospital or to that area if I get an acute appendicitis, that I'd be comfortable allowing them to touch my appendix. If I'm not, then I should not be pushing for them to give that kind of care. So building systems takes time. I think we need to take time to build them. Let us not take shortcuts. One other avenue that has worked, certainly in my view, is a commitment. This is a story of a single surgeon and his wife, Louis and Ann Carter from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I don't have his permission, but he doesn't have any choice. But we've interacted since 1996. He's my mentor. He's made trips, annual trips, spending any time between 6 weeks and 3 months at that time. We built friendships, skills transfer, graduated independence, equipment supplies, mentorship, and interaction and contact throughout my training period in and out of the country. And one of the last, maybe, I don't know, 6-8 years ago, he told me, Peter, you don't need me anymore. This is him operating with, or pretending to be operating with me. And next, the other person is a resident who spent about a year from the US, spent about a year with me in training. Plastic surgery is a complex specialty. We take care of very complex problems, and they need an intimate knowledge of the subject. And ideally, we should be able to take care of problems from the time of birth, make diagnoses that are unsure and are not certain, to treating, complex trauma, taking care of malignancy. In fact, this lower down here, this is a guy who unfortunately was poorly taken care of. Somebody did not notice they had a pathological fracture. They put a hardware in there. By the time they got to us, you can see met right there. It was a single metastasis at the time. And so a hemipelvectomy. Unfortunately, the LMIC plastic surgeon requires to be multi-specialty trained, because frequently you handle a lot more than you otherwise would. When do you decide an amputation versus salvage, and what can you use that allows you to operate on, this in Vanderbilt would probably have a free flap. In my hands, this was a perforator flap, which serves the same purpose, but takes a lot shorter time and allows me to go to sleep. Same thing, Achilles completely gone, some 25 centimeters, can be reconstructed with a perforator flap and the local peroneus brevis, for example. and allow the person to go back to ambulation. What do you do with this patient following burns that presents 2 years after everything is gone? And so difficult questions, difficult solutions, difficult problems, and you can't train a person to think this way in a year or 2 years. And so we would be fooling ourselves, I think, to believe that we can solve problems easily and quickly. We need to build programs. See, this guy has taken time to pink up. So global surgery requires, so they have to eat algae from the bottom of these lakes, and that's what gives them the beautiful colors. Global surgery needs to learn her lessons from flamingos. There are success stories, certainly other success stories. This paper by Campbell et al. On this Indian hospital that provides cleft surgery, a unique public-private partnership between government, charity, and private enterprise is a beautiful example of what can happen where there is a will. I think that will exists. We just need a few more examples to allow things like this to take place. Now, this is focused on one problem, but certainly this could focus on a lot more problems than this. And so this is a controversial but important statement that Karan makes in his opinion op-ed. At its worst, global health today is a self-congratulatory neo-colonial machine in which doctors, professors, researchers, and others from wealthy places with abounding privilege are further exalted because they are doing work at their global south, that their global south counterparts do as part of their everyday lives with little to no recognition. At best, it's a humble attempt to equal the playing field of life between North and South by trying to unravel the tightly bound chains of a colonialism. And he makes this statement, and I guess I can identify with certain aspects of this statement because in reading one of the guidelines that I've gone through, statement about the substandard institutions that we work in, and a few rather unsavory remarks. And my statement to this group of people was, rather than looking at places of work as substandard, why not come and understand how we can produce results in this substandard environments with little equipment and infrastructure? Why are we still able to take care of a certain, give quality care to patients that need it with all the constraints that we have? And so that's, I think, being able to transfer our bias to, and allowing ourselves to learn. Both sides of the divide have lots to learn. And unfortunately, I don't have the rights to these papers, but I've plagiarized, self-plagiarized these papers. My argument is I think we need to change the narrative and become truly global in the way we act and serve. So in conclusion, the value of Blitz surgery in meeting some of the surgical needs of others neglected communities is absolutely undeniable. However, long-term sustainability needs to be the guiding principle for any engagement in global surgery, I think, in the coming days and years. Ultimately, LMICs must take charge of their own destiny. The international community can only come along and help us get there, and together we can do it. But we must take our own destiny and allow our friends to come along and help us get there. Otherwise, in the absence of long-term plans for sustainability, these humanitarian efforts continue to be drops in the ocean, meeting the needs of individuals, but not communities, and certainly not leaving any long-term gains. as I suggested before, I think academic global surgery provides the answer to lots of our questions. Not perfect, but it's a new and evolving specialty that I think could take leadership. Human resource is available. I mean, we have, LMICs have what percentage of the world's population? So human resource is not a problem. It's just skills that are needed. I had the privilege of training. I've had the privilege of training in Kenya, of course, in India and in Spain, and visiting a number of high-income country hospitals. And so to be able to grasp use the infrastructure that we have to and attempt to provide the same care that I see patients receive in places with a lot more infrastructure and equipment is a challenge, but it's possible. So we look at what COSEXA has done and what WACS has done for Western Africa. Certainly the universities, although they continue to provide just a small number of people, but they continue to be an important part of human resource production, so to speak, skills, etc. And I think high-income countries, global surgeons, people interested in global surgery would come along and fit into the structure within the places where they'd like to work, and see how we can provide the care that is so badly needed. The other aspect of academic global surgery that is useful, I think, is there's a global surgery curriculum. There's a paper that's in the pipeline looking at this. A global surgery curriculum will level the field and allow us to grow, mature, and be sustainable, so that we're able to lead the rest of the global health field into a truly equal high-income country LMIC partnership model. I take this quote from Church et al.'s paper, where Professor Colley was senior author. Plastic surgery plays a significant role in the coverage of essential surgical conditions in LICs, and continued expansion of plastic surgical workforce and accompanying infrastructure is critical to meet unmet surgical burden in LMICs. And so I make the statement that the paucity of plastic surgeons in LMIC positions the plastic surgery fraternity and certainly ICOPLAST in an especially enviable position at the head of the pack, so to speak, towards potential revolution in global health. With the ability to push training and produce plastic surgeons that are well-trained across the LMIC world, like the Missing Tusk in this elephant that we saw recently in the Amboseli. LMICs are often missing in global surgery undertakings and discussions. It is time to change that. I'd like to end there. Thank you very much. That's my email, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was an inspirational presentation, and really the voice that I think we all need to hear. I would like to invite Corstiaan to give his talk, and then we'll open the floor to discussion on Peter and Corstiaan's presentations after that. Corstiaan, over to you. Thanks.
Good morning. Let me get this going. There we go. Yes, I must be very honest. When I received this paper from, or this call from Miko to talk about this topic, he gave me quite an interesting title. And to be very honest, yes, I tried to change the title once or twice in the email conversation we had. But in the end, this was the title that I received back from him. And I actually had to go and find, as a true Dutchman, I had to try and define again what the term self-perpetuating means again. So here are some different definitions from the Merriam-Webster and the Cambridge Dictionary. And I actually like the one where it's trying to renew itself indefinitely. So good morning to all of you. In the Netherlands, it's about 1:30 at night. This is not normally a time that I'm awake, but I'm glad to see that there's some other Dutch people also awake, Gabriel and Maria and Roos and Merel. So I'm not the only one being awake. So it's a real privilege being here, and truly an honor to speak to you guys with some other well-known people and trying to learn from each other, because I think that's the big thing. There are probably many different ways that we can help, and there's so much work for all of us to do as well. So I'm proud to be here. Now, I think I have to take you back to where the Interplast Netherlands initiated. In 1989, this was a team that initially went to Uganda, and this was Rein Zeeman, who was the initiator of Interplast Holland. And like I said, the first mission trip was undertaken by Interplast Germany. And then in 1990, these three people decided to initiate an organization in the Netherlands, and they called that Interplast Holland. So this is what our board looks like currently. I'm the president, but we have got a professor of global health, Charles Agyeman, who comes from Ghana, who's also on our board. We have a nurse, a quality care nurse. We've got the head of pediatrics anesthesia, and we've got an ICT specialist on board as well. Now, unfortunately, Rein Zeeman passed away a couple of weeks ago on the 19th of April of this year. And I must be very honest, I only took over the reins last year. So I've not been in charge very long of Interplast Holland. I was involved with Interplast Holland before, a little bit the last couple of years, but Rein fairly suddenly passed away. So these are the centers that Interplast is currently affiliated with and working together. We have been doing a lot of surgery, and as Peter already said, you know, in the past, and I must be very honest, Interplast was part of that. Numbers are very important, and obviously that's always frustrated me a little bit. I know the political background of numbers, because that's one way how you as an NGO can sell yourself, but it's always fascinating to find the discrepancy in trying to find or get funding from somebody. When you give them numbers about the amount of surgeries you do, it's just so much easier to find and get money. If you tell them you want to conduct or help with some burn prevention program, people are just way less interested, and that's sad. So after Rein Zeeman came back, they started undertaking many more missions. Interplast, there was actually a worldwide Interplast meeting that I did not know about. And then and this is interesting, they started going to places where Dr. Ha, for instance, in Vietnam, after a while, she said, Interplast, you know, guys, thank you. I think I can do this on my own now. So after about 4 or 5 missions, she started doing her own surgeries, running her own units, financing it herself. And this is a great picture that I found in the archives. You know, how do you teach somebody to put the needle in? So this was kind of interesting. Just some pictures that we're all very comfortable with. Now, Saudi Arabia was also an area where Interplast went to. And, you know, I must be very honest, just to take a small side road, I had to be quite critical and trying to find ways of seeing, you know, what is working for Interplast and what has not worked. But what worked 20 years ago is obviously not working anymore, because times have changed. we are looking at things very differently at the moment. But Yemen was a country where Interplast went to in 1997, and then there was a couple of years break. And then my colleagues met Dr. Amari, a plastic surgeon, and he actually came to the Netherlands for some training. And after a couple of missions, because of political unrest, things stopped. People didn't go there anymore, but he started running his own unit. And when Rein Zeeman recently passed away, it was interesting to see what people said, that the way that he personally influenced their lives, or how Interplast influenced their lives. So this was one way how Dr. Amari said, you know, since and there were a couple of mission trips that Interplast undertook to Yemen, and then he and 3 other plastic surgeons started their own unit in 2007, and it was good to see how everything proceeded from there. Now, one of the important things that I learned by looking back is that, you know, getting the local people involved is obviously crucial. It looks so simple, but that's not always happened in the past. But the Interplast operated in many different countries, and one of the countries where they did most of their work was in Uganda. And when they went to Kampala, one of the first things they did is to get the local people involved, the local Rotary. And it was interesting to see, because that photo was taken more than 20 years ago. This was what the president of Rotary in Kampala wrote to me a couple of weeks ago after he heard that Rein Zeeman passed away. And it was fascinating to see how he complimented him, and how he has helped, how Interplast and the team helped to erect the plastic surgery unit in Kampala, which has become a big reference hospital for Uganda. So in 2003, there was actually a contract signed between the Uganda Burns and Plastic Surgery Institute and Interplast Holland. And at that stage, it was quite interesting. Most of the financing of the unit was still done by Interplast Holland. And that's obviously not the way, but at that stage, this was nearly 20 years ago, that was how things were. Containers were sent over, monitors were sent over, beds were sent over from the Netherlands. And then in 2004, the Burns and Plastic Surgery Unit was opened. There was even, and there still is, a Holland ward. This is what the beds looked like on the inside. They created a library. There was a kitchen, and these were the doctors, and many of these doctors, 3 of these people are still involved. They've been there for many, many years, for me, more than 17 years. And this is what they're doing at the moment. And Rein Zeeman went back for many, many times. He worked there constantly for the last couple of years. He was not there since last year, October. But it was fascinating to see how the people did their own thing and how they proceeded without him. So that's obviously what we should aim for, you know. When can we withdraw, and when can the people run their own unit? Because that's like Peter already just said before me, you know, that's what we want. Sorry, we don't need you anymore. So that's perfect for us to aim for. Only in 2016, so the burn unit, plastic surgery unit, was initiated in 2004. The government said, you know, we will be financing the plastic surgery unit. So till that time, the Interplast Holland financed that unit, which is fascinating when you think about it. It's interesting that the burns prevention program, which is a program running parallel to the burns unit, is still being financed by Interplast Holland at the moment. And personally, you know, I think we should find a way how we can have the local people to finance that themselves as well. In 2016, the plastic surgery unit changed, went to a new hospital, and it was on the 4th floor with an open balcony, which is always good for burns, obviously. They had like 20 burn unit beds. This is what the admission ward looks like. There is an own ICU in italics where they have 8 beds. And this is what we like to see, obviously, right? We like to see a primary surgeon being a surgeon from the LMIC, and anybody else can be the tutor, preferably from a LMIC as well. So just to keep you guys awake, I have made 2 small videos, not too long. So I'm gonna play you this, see if, you know, let's hope that it works.
Here at the burns unit in Kampala, Uganda, we've been treating and operating burns for many years. From our paperwork, we found out that most of our patients came from the slums. The poorest, the unprivileged, and among them, many children. The cause of these burns are open fires, unfenced cooking areas, candles, and unsafe electric connections. Cooking is done on small charcoal stoves, sikiris, on top of which are large teetering pots, and small kids are playing around them. Sometimes even inside their clay huts. Prevention could solve so many problems here. After all, better safe than sorry. Together with the Dutch Burn Society, we have set up a burn prevention program. We trained local people to become burns prevention officers. And after 2 years, Interplast Holland took over. Since children from these slums also go to school, we have extended the program Burns Prevention Clubs in final year of primary school. The children are trained and provided with orange t-shirts, which they are very proud to wear. This way they are recognizable as volunteers. With leaflets and advice, they visit the communities. Our volunteers also give practical lessons, explaining their schoolmates why burns should not be treated with oil, toothpaste or sugar, only with water. They also inform the others in school using role play, poems, and songs. By now, already 50 schools are involved in this project. The enthusiasm of these children makes burns prevention here an immense success.
All right, so that was just to keep you guys awake. This was a paper by John Mehara, where he said it's so important to get the strong leaders needed to change things that we think and how we approach things. But these leaders should come from the low and middle income countries. I've got a couple of sayings that people said that Interplast has worked with. This is what Idris Kalanzi, it's a plastic surgeon working in Kampala in the burn units, says about plastic surgery. He says, you know, Interplast has given him many opportunities. Zeeman went there, and they still use some of the materials that was sent over, and they, Interplast still supplies them with support, although the government is involved as well. Often the finance is just not enough, to look for good care about wounds. They still need supplies. This is a plastic surgeon that was trained in Kampala as well, that's working in the Congo at the moment. And he also says, Interplast has been involved in their training, and that's what, one of the main things that we should do is we can help with training, maybe help people that are less privileged financially to get through the residency, and then continue on their own or start something new, like Dr. Etu did. He was a plastic surgeon he is a plastic surgeon at the moment. All these surgeons trained through COSEXA. And currently he's in a plastic surgery unit in Ghana, where after he's training in Kampala, and he's started a unit. He's got 26 beds at the moment. And it's interesting to see how well he has developed as well. Now, this is a slide that most of you know, obviously, where is the area of most need? These are the traumas or the causes of these high figures, because we all know from the Lancet paper that about 5 billion people don't get care to surgical care, or at least medical care, at a good time or at the critical time that they should need care. So these are the nine units again that we're involved in. Now, and I'm just using Uganda as an example because that's honestly the most developed program. But Interplast is doing work in Burundi as well, where we're doing a lot with the burn care. But it's just the infrastructure is just less well organized than in Uganda. So we most of what we learn from what we did wrong in the past, or maybe did right, comes from Uganda. Well, this we saw back in the pictures or in the video. How do we in the burn prevention program? These are the people that are actually running the program. Like I said initially, Interplast are doing some things right, and one of the things is that the local people are coordinating this. Personally, I think that is great. On the other hand, the whole program is being financed by Interplast Holland, which I think is not correct. So we have to find a different way, and we are definitely thinking about different ways of financing that, or helping the local people to try and finance the program themselves. Currently, we are having regular meetings. This is the project manager, Stephen Coteau, of the burn prevention unit. These are the burn officers. And as you heard in the video, these people were trained by the Dutch Burn Association, which is obviously great. They went over there to teach them. This is a health worker looking at the patient folder that Interplast Holland helped to develop. And in the end, this is a great picture of the local people going to their own people and telling them, how will we solve this problem? We learned that awareness weeks does not work so well, does not really work good enough. So it's not really worthwhile, or we felt that it was tried a couple of times and it never really had the effect that we were looking for. However, during this was one picture where people did go into the slums to speak to the people. The symposia, get a good vibe between the surgeons and the local the local surgeons, but it did not really have the effect that we thought for. We definitely learned that going to the schools has a good effect. Getting the school people involved, I think getting the highest people from the primary school, the grade 8s or whatever grade, what it's called in your country, but getting the oldest people from primary school involved in trying to create a play and sharing that where the rest of the school really works well. Getting the mothers involved obviously works well as well. Interplast got in contact with a company that does a lot with solar energy. You know, when we're thinking about prevention of burns, there are many logical ways. You know, how can you protect the open fires and sort of make a protection around that, a little wall, or try and create a sort of a kitchen somewhere in the house or just outside. But another way is solar energy, and this was a company. It was called it was initiated after the World Cup soccer in South Africa, and that was the theme song, Waka Waka, obviously. And Interplast took this company and they went to Uganda, trying to get students involved to have a light that they can use during nighttime to study if they wanted to, or at least have a light at home and not use fires or candles. This is one of my other videos, the second one. There are not too many.
I am Dr. Jean-Claude Bizimana from Burundi. I would like to learn surgery here in Kampala. This is a special unity, burn unity, which doesn't exist in my country. There isn't plastician surgeons. Maybe I will be the #1 in my country, maybe, if I finish. Yes. And recently we went at Rumonge and the Karus Hospital. Everywhere we went, we found a crowd of people in need of help, in need of that kind of surgery. Imagine, I will never forget a little girl who stayed in the hospital with a chronic wound, but when the team of Interplast came, they did a skin graft, and in 2 weeks, the wound was safe. It was like a miracle. Yeah. After this interview, I joined immediately my boss there in the theater to continue operating here in burn unity of Kirud Hospital, Kampala, Uganda. To do some operations like cleft lips, skin grafts, and so on. But I need to be trained for full-time, for specialty, in order to help my people, to help Burundian people in need.
So there was a real clear question, right? He needs training, and many people come from areas where they just don't have the finance to train. And this was a surgeon that Interplast has been working with in Zanzibar for a long time, Dr. Juma. And last year we decided, you know, one way of helping people is to initiate a scholarship. So this is we gave him a scholarship to start his training, and he trains in Uganda at the moment. And you know, his question was very clear. You know, can somebody help me financing the training. Interplast published a little booklet, a practical booklet about cleft surgery. You know, we're involved in research as well. This was a study done together with Rami Kanta, where we looked at, this was a study done in South America with South American surgeons, trying to find out, you know, what do you need in your country? Because like Peter also said, most of the studies being performed in LMICs are being performed by people from high income countries. So it's crucial to get the people from the low income countries in the lead, telling the people what they need. All right, so Interplast also started collaborating with Sally Adams from Grote Schuur. Obviously a different, more middle income country, but his need was very clear. You know, we'd like to collaborate research-wise. These were some of the publications recently published, and there are more coming, where the local surgeons are in the lead. And this is a doctor that comes very close to where you're from, Peter, from Kenya, that we're collaborating with as well. You know, this is a course we are running together with my university. And we said, you know, let's invite the COSEXA registrars for free to come and join us. Ambitions for the new board, you know, it was interesting because Charles Agyeman from Kenya said, you know, Corstiaan, the most important thing is to make sure that the local people start using the terms of ownership and commitment. You know, it's something that we do together, but they should be in the lead, and they should tell us what we need. And you know, we don't want it to be a surgical blitz action, and we don't want commandos to come in and tell people what to do. There is one theme that I'm not 100% sure about if it's the right theme. I hear that the academic global surgery is a theme that's being used much and much more. I appreciate what is meant by the term, but I'm not 100% sure if I support the term academic centers, because I know that in the Netherlands, at least, many academic hospitals are run by doctors that are specialists in their little field. And in the Netherlands, in some peripheral hospitals, we have some very, very practical doctors that have been going to low-income countries for many, many years. So I think we should not only use the term academic specialists. I think there are many peripheral specialists in the Netherlands that are maybe much more practical than many academic specialists. So we still have to find a balance in what we call that. But I fully appreciate the value that the affiliation of an academic center can mean to a low-income country. Now, the future, you know, Corona has changed our lives, and in many ways, it's been very positive. You know, we are having this meeting now, and Corona has opened doors for us digitally to meet. I think there are, and that's what Interplast Holland is organizing at the moment. You know, how do we keep the contact with local institutions in low-income countries and in high-income countries much more regular? Zoom is a nice way. I will come back to the 4K surgical glasses in a couple of seconds. Now, this is a way of teaching that I think many of us are familiar with, but you know, how can somebody standing here see what the surgeon is doing, or that gentleman there, how can he learn, or how can he see what the surgeon is doing? Now, this virus, like I said, has changed our lives. And one of the ways that's been very positive is that we have started using a way of proctoring from a distance, where we're using special glasses, where, you know, this is a little camera right in front of me, and my residents can sit at home and watch me do the surgery. And I can sit behind my screen, and as I point with my mouse now, I can tell him, because my residents sometimes put this camera on and then they operate, I can tell him, like the other day, he did a secondary lip correction, secondary cleft lip correction. And I could tell him, you know, I would make the Z-plasty angle, I would make it a little bit more obtuse or a little bit more sharper, and I would extend this a little bit further. So I think this is a great way how, you know, we can teach. The assistant sees exactly what I do, so he does not stand next to me, or there's not a camera in the light of the operating room, and they can be at home or vice versa. And for me personally, it's also been interesting watching my surgery back. So it's not, you know, only from a learning perspective for other people, but I think personally it's a great way for me to learn. So this is what it looks like when I operate. There are some screens, so the people around me can also look and see what this what I see. Because of the time, I think I will. This was a patient with a mandibular distraction, but I actually have another picture that a small video. It's not long. I will just to give you guys an impression of what this looks like. So people can actually see exactly. So this is what the view looks like when people are home. I can take you a little bit further on to where, you know, so you can indicate exactly. And the interesting thing is, you know, there is a little microphone at your ear, so people can ask you questions, and people at home can also hear what I say. So whenever I give instructions about surgery, they can ask me questions. This is a great video for me to finish off. It's just very, very short. So it's always fantastic when you see people coming back after the visit that you had at the unit. So I must be very honest. I think Interplast did many things right in the past, but they also did many things wrong. And I think we can learn from each other. And this meeting is a great way to learn from each other's successes. And I think we have to talk about failures, things that did not work as well, to see how we can all help each other, because I think that's the way forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Corstiaan. It was an amazing presentation, and so wonderful to see through the years so much work being done by Interplast Holland and a really rich history. I think it's inspiring to see also the lessons being learned and the direction perhaps going a little bit more towards what Peter was insinuating. I'm actually very curious to hear your take on Peter's presentation. Do you have you know, are you more emboldened in your mission to you know, empower the local LMIC surgeons, and do you agree with Peter that the 3 goals for our work as humanitarian plastic surgeon should be education, education, and education.
I agree fully to what Peter says, besides one thing. And it's always good to have a discussion. Like I said in my presentation, the term academics is, and maybe that's just the wrong words of usage, but I see that especially from Northern American countries, there is sort of a run on trying to find a low-income country center that they can be affiliated with, but maybe that's just my impression. While, like I said, in the Netherlands, I know that some very, very capable doctors are not working in an academic hospital, and that's just how the medical system works in the Netherlands. And I know in the States it's very different. So maybe the term academic global health is not the perfect term, but I appreciate what it means, right? You have teaching, teaching, teaching. Yes, I fully agree. And what I fully agree with well, basically everything that Peter said, I agree with otherwise. So I think we're definitely thinking about the same things. Yes.
And Peter, yeah, thanks, Corstiaan. And now I think it would be great to hear Peter's take.
You froze a bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you, Peter. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't. Yeah. I guess it says my internet is unstable, but yeah, go ahead.
Shall I repeat myself a little bit? Or you can do it, Miko.
Yeah. So Peter, we're curious to hear your take on.
Let me just. Something's not quite right with my end, but hopefully you can hear me. Christian, thank you very much. I agree with you to the extent that I think that academic global surgeons value, but academic surgeon for me is someone who's interested in training, in teaching, but would be affiliated to a program that allows for them to be able to represent or to present what they've done, what they do. So because you have learners, whatever work is done needs to be translated. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm lost, I think. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, we're hearing you pretty well now, Peter.
Okay, so I think for me the term I would not take the North American understanding of the term academic global surgeon. My take is somebody. So the problem with short-term mission trips is the lack of transparency. The advantage of quote-unquote academic global programs is their transparency, because the results are clear, the processes are very clear, the learning is clear, the objective is clear, that you are planning to pour yourself onto whatever place you are in and build a sustainable program in place. And that would be my understanding. So, it doesn't matter where you come from, as long as you're not going into some deep desert place where you have no contact with anybody, nobody knows who you are. So the other important bit is the move towards accountability, because most trips, most programs have had no accountability. That becomes very visible if you include aspects of quote unquote academia. Academia for me is just the transfer of knowledge and skills to the next generation or to the LMIC programs to allow for sustainability. Hopefully that clarifies. I do not think of a university in North America or in the Netherlands partnering with another university. That's a very, that would be a very narrow field. Nobody's going to be reached. Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks for clarifying. It's a matter of definition, I suppose, what you call academic, and if we just keep the broad term education, maybe that would make it easier. And I think we at ICOPLAST, being quite a young organization, but very broadly represented with many LMIC countries represented with their member societies. I see us as having potentially a very important role in coordinating training and sustainable development of plastic surgery resources in LMICs around the world. This is only just the beginning. But I think that's a very important conversation to have. Now, I would like to just pass on to Horatio. Horatio, if you're ready to introduce our other two speakers, and then we can have an interesting discussion, I think, at the conclusion of those two talks as well. Is that okay?
Yes. Thank you, Miko, and congrats on gathering such a remarkable group of professionals. It is my pleasure to introduce Cameron Glover. Cameron is the CEO of Interplast since December 2019. Cameron has proven experience in the non-profit sector with over 10-year experience. Cameron has previously worked at Interplast Deputy CEO and led the fundraising, marketing, and communication teams for Interplast. Welcome, Cameron.
Thanks, Horatio, and thanks to Miko, and again, congratulations to Miko and to ICOPLAST more broadly for bringing this conversation together, because it is a conversation that needs to be had, and it's a conversation that needs to be had more than once. And I think it's at least good that the conversation is starting to occur, because to Peter's point earlier, global surgery is an evolving practice, and I think as practitioners in that space, we need to be considering what comes next. And Corstiaan made a comment before that COVID-19 was something none of us wanted, but in some ways it has forced change, and many of those changes will be positive and long-lasting. So I think that's something almost worth celebrating out of a year that has thrown up a lot of concern. So to everyone in attendance, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, in fact, depending on where you're joining us. And it's great to see there are a number of people from the Asia Pacific region in particular, or the Oceania region, as it's often said, joining us today. Perhaps different to the rest of the panel joining us, I am not a surgeon, and in fact, I'm not a doctor. And to be brutally honest, the clinical expertise I've experienced is only ever as a patient. I'm an administrator. It's my role as the CEO of Interplast Australia and New Zealand to decide and to resource the activities that are occurring, to ensure that we have adequate volunteers and clinicians who are able to conduct those activities, and to partner effectively with international governments and to look at how we add value and where we subtract value. And if we're brutally honest as organisations, I think we do a little bit of both. We absolutely add value, but I think we also do some things that perhaps we shouldn't be doing in the longer term. And so COVID has allowed that opportunity for us to look at how we do things, but also it's something that we've been doing for some time. And so perhaps for those of you that are unaware of the Interplast Australia and New Zealand journey, let me just start there because it does differ a little bit. So Interplast Australia and New Zealand was formed in 1983. And looks similar to how Interplast Netherlands came about. Primarily, it was a group of well-meaning surgeons partnering with a philanthropic arm at the time, or in fact, in our case, it was Rotary as well, who started to deploy medical teams across nations to provide surgery, and they were fly-in, fly-out missions. What I'm proud to say, though, is Interplast changed our mission and the way we worked quite quickly. And for a long time now, our focus has been as a development organisation, not as a humanitarian organisation. I think that's an important distinction because for us as an organisation, we are set up to build long-term capacity. We're set up to assist and grow sort of plastic surgery predominantly within low-income countries across the Asia-Pacific region. But we do that through a number of means. And one of those means are sort of short-term surgical visits, but there's always a teaching component. And I will touch on that a little bit later. So having started in 1983, traditionally, or at least immediately prior to COVID, we were working across 17 countries in the region. Everywhere from Bangladesh and Bhutan, Fiji, Indonesia, Kiribati, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, Nepal, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Samoa, the Solomon Islands, Sri Lanka, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Vietnam. A long list, but I think one of the pleasing things for us as an organisation is many of those countries that we partner with have been partners with us for a number of years. And I think that's also important to note because we don't fly in, perform surgery, fly out, never to be seen again. The Interplast Australia and New Zealand model is about long-term sustainability and growth. And as a result of that, we only work where we're invited, is the first thing. And we are quite proactive in ensuring that whilst we have partners at a local level, at hospital level, or in fact, at a sort of even a clinician level, the Ministry of Health in that country where we're working has to be in agreement that we're there. And, I think it was Peter's comment earlier where he said, many ministries of health are happy to sort of hand over the treatment of patients to others. That's not what we do. We are not there to take the treatment of patients when others can't do it. Immediately prior to COVID-19, we were delivering close to 85 programs in countries. And as I said before, often with repeat teams. And those programs differed significantly. So some were those short-term sort of 2-week type surgical programs. Many of them were the opportunity to provide training and resourcing, and we certainly offer a number of scholarships. We often bring Pacific surgeons out to Australia for training, or in fact some of our Asian colleagues as well, all designed to build longer term capacity. And I mentioned before too, as an organisation, we are recognised at least by the Australian and New Zealand governments as a development organisation, and that separates us from a humanitarian organisation. So again, it may be semantics of wording, but if you think humanitarian, you're often thinking, the Red Cross or organisations like that are often responding to disaster situations or war-torn positions. Interplast is not a first responder. We're not there primarily to exist first and foremost. We are there to build capacity. And the thing for us that would give us the most benefit is for us to actually tell the story of when we leave a country. Success for us is when we leave, because that means we're no longer needed. And both Peter and Corstiaan made that point earlier today. The organisation is a relatively small one in that we have 450 volunteers that provide clinical care, most of those being fully qualified plastic surgeons, obviously some anaesthetists and nurses, and also allied health professionals. So one of the things we are very conscious of at Interplast Australia and New Zealand is surgery is only one step in the treatment plan. And a burn contracture, whilst being released by a highly qualified surgeon, actually needs good post-operative care and needs some rehab and some physiotherapy and the like. A cleft surgery, often that comes with the need for some additional speech therapy and the like. So there's need there, and so Interplast looks at that continuum of care, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. Since our beginnings in 1983, we have been dealing with close to 45 patient consultations. Of that, probably only 30,000 surgeries have been performed. And primarily, we're funded by private donation. We do receive a little bit of government funding through the development funds in Australia, but primarily we self-fund all our work. Where we do differ from other organisations that work in global surgery is sort of our key areas of focus. So we don't shy away from the fact that first and foremost, we do have a focus on exceptional patient care. The belief being that a patient in a major trauma hospital in Melbourne, Australia, or Auckland in New Zealand should receive the exact same quality as a patient that's being seen by an Interplast team or an Interplast trained surgical team in Fiji or Samoa or Bangladesh. The quality of care shouldn't change, because good quality patient care should in fact be a fundamental right. And so, that's a really important consideration for us. Importantly though, and in fact, Peter touched on this a little bit earlier as well, Interplast doesn't travel with a lot of equipment. We certainly bring consumables, we certainly take the required equipment, but we're not in the business of taking in a whole lot of equipment that wouldn't exist normally in the hospital where we're working. And the reason for that is if we're treating and if we're training, then there's no point taking the latest, most amazing piece of technology that we then take it home with us and never gets used again. And so for that reason, we work largely with what's available in the clinical setting where we're working. We do also strive for a sustainable surgical workforce, and you would all be aware of some of the global health indicators and the goals for coverage in sustainable workforces by 2030 and the like. Interplast is very much supportive of that view, that there is a need for good quality surgical care, and the best way that can occur in low-income countries is by developing a sustainable workforce. Now, we recognise that some of the countries where we work, some of the smaller Pacific islands in particular, may never have a sustainable plastics workforce. That is something we have to accept because their population either doesn't allow it or there's simply not the resource available to us. But importantly, for us, a sustainable workforce is also a general surgeon that can do basic plastics. So, if an individual that requires burns or burns contracture release can't see a plastic surgeon, can we train general surgeons to a level that they can perform a successful burns contracture release? So it's perhaps a little bit controversial in some areas, but the reality is, in fact, there are across the Pacific, in the low-income nations in the Pacific, there are only 2 fully qualified plastic surgeons, one in Fiji, who you'll hear from after me, and one in PNG. Neither one of them would be able to cover the entire workload of the Pacific, so we need to work with general surgeons to ensure that they can take some of that lead. The other thing that we recognise is good quality patient care doesn't happen in isolation. It needs strong and effective clinical settings or hospitals, and importantly, it needs a health system that supports it. And that may be through the introduction of national workforce strategies, it may be through clear training programs and development pathways, but even simple things that we often take for granted, like a referral system, that allows a surgeon to refer a patient for physiotherapy care post-surgery, that needs to be part of the work as well. And so Interplast in Australia and New Zealand spend a lot of time with governments in the countries where we work, trying to work with them to identify need. But importantly, we don't do it for them. We will support and we will partner, but ultimately the country where we're working has to request it. Because without that, it is very much a case of, Interplast simply delivering a program that we think is of value without talking to those that need it most. And for us, that is a key function of what we do. Given that the focus of my topic needed to be on fulfilling the mission of humanitarian plastic surgery in pandemic times, we'd all like to forget, but let's just take through what happened as far as COVID. So December 31st in 2019, which actually was only 3 weeks after my appointment, was when we first started to hear media reports globally of viral pneumonia, which was coming out of Wuhan in China. We weren't sure at that stage what it was. We weren't sure the scale of what it was, but we knew at that point that there was something that needed to be investigated. In late January 2020, we started to see the first confirmed case of novel coronavirus in the USA and amongst other countries as well. We started to see it emerging in France. And there was a fairly compelling belief by that stage, and the evidence was suggesting that there was human-to-human spread. That becomes important because it actually impacts how global surgery and humanitarian surgery worked beyond that point. In February of that year, we started to see cases outside of China. So again, 176 at that stage. But there was a belief that the spread may still be minimal. There wasn't necessarily a view in early Feb of 2020 that coronavirus was going to cause the problems that we've since seen it cause. Interestingly, though, on the 5th of February, the World Health Organization started to do daily media briefings. And that was the first time in history that the World Health Organization started to brief the media. And it wasn't until the 11th of March that year that they officially declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic. That's important because it does change a number of things. And sadly, we know, that as we sit here today, there's 161 million cases, or have been 161 million cases globally, 3.3 odd million deaths. A number of countries that did very well in the early stages of the pandemic treatment have since started to struggle. And I look to some of the Pacific nations in particular, like Australia and like New Zealand, who have been blessed, if you like, through our response, that it hasn't been a major part of our life over the last 12 months. A number of the Pacific nations were able to close down very quickly. The island state allowed them to restrict borders. But that had a flow-on effect, certainly from a surgical point of view, and certainly from the ability for teams to travel both in and out of countries. Sadly, we're now seeing some of those early successes change, and we are starting to see another spike in cases amongst some areas in the Pacific. And certainly, we're all aware of some of the challenges facing places like India, where just outside of India, places like Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka are all starting to see again increases in numbers, and that is of great concern. But what that meant for us as an organisation, and ultimately for the partners that we work with across the countries where we work in the international community. So Interplast has not sent a team under a sort of a traditional way of mobilising teams since February of 2020. In fact, the very last team we had on the ground was in Laos, interestingly, walking distance to the China border at the time, who were there in Feb, but obviously at that point, no more. And there were a number of reasons for that. Firstly, we did start to see international border closures. So again, a number of the Pacific islands started to restrict entry into their countries. Many of the Asian countries where we work were a little slower to restrict entry, but they did get to that point. And in fact, in New Zealand and Australia, we started to experience travel bans. So in Australia, there are still, to this very day, only certain reasons that you can travel internationally at the moment. It does require a permit and an exemption from government. So the free flowing of free movement of people has stopped, at least in this part of the world. The other thing that changed for the organisation was the need for surge capacity here in Australia and in fact in New Zealand. So surgeons, nurses, anaesthetists that would often travel on our programs were no longer able to get leave from their hospitals because there was a view at that point that we may see a surge in Australia, and thankfully that surge has yet to occur, and touch wood, it never does occur. But we started to see clinicians unable to get leave from hospitals. Perhaps things that I as an administrator look at, but surgeons and the like don't also look at. We started to see changes in things like travel insurance and our ability not only to get flights, but the ability to protect teams if we could get them out. And so within Australia, there was the opening of a humanitarian pathway, which allowed some movement, but actually we couldn't cover surgeons or nurses or any of our teams had they even been able to travel under those provisions. And so that was of great concern. But perhaps most importantly, what we were hearing from our partners is that they needed to focus on their own COVID responses, not on the provision of surgery. And so like we saw in Australia and New Zealand, where a number of our surgeons were in fact stood down temporarily from anything other than emergency cases. But for us, our international partners were saying, we simply don't have the capacity at the moment to accommodate visiting teams. We need you back and we will need you back fast, but we don't have the ability right now. What also occurred on a global scale was there was an immediate change to funding priority. So I mentioned that Interplast in Australia and New Zealand is primarily privately funded through donors and the like, with very little government funding. Any government funding that was available, and in fact any of the funding that was available through large philanthropic organisations, even to this day, have moved most of their funding priorities to COVID response. And so that changed how we needed to apply for funding, but it also changed what the focus of the work that we were doing. And so I often say, you know, our mission has not changed, but how we deliver it has. And I mentioned earlier that perhaps that's not a bad thing, but it's a continuation of what Interplast Australia and New Zealand has been doing for some time. And let me touch on what that means. You would also, many of you would be aware that there was a paper published last year that was certainly in the British Journal that was suggesting that because of COVID, there would be 28 million surgeries that would go undone last year alone, simply because they had been cancelled for, you know, ensuring that ICUs and anaesthetic care and the like weren't tied up with elective surgery. They needed to be focused on patient outcomes if COVID took off in those nations. So the impact globally was massive and sadly continues to be so. For us as an organisation, we really had two choices. And I think in hindsight, the choice made itself. There was never really a question, but we had to ask. And if you look around the world at the moment, there are a number of providers of surgery and a number of providers of sort of plastic surgery or global surgery who effectively over the last 12 months shut up shop. They simply went missing because that was, in their view, the right thing to do. Interplast took quite a different approach at that time, where we said, we are still needed, but we're needed in different ways because that's what our partners were telling us. We were hearing that we were in fact needed more than ever because, you know, the surgeons, the anaesthetists, the nurses, allied health professionals that we work with day in, day out across the Asia Pacific region suddenly had access to their training cut off. So we needed to be in a position where we could fill some of the training requirements for them. They needed ongoing specialist skills. No longer could we send in a team at their request to support a complex case. They needed to be able to access secondary consults or, you know, access to some advice and some support in different manners. And so we did look at how we could provide that. We knew that equipment was still a priority for some of the countries where we worked, and their access to supply chains were lower than they had ever been, because they were starting to see some changes and some restrictions in the importation of equipment if they couldn't produce it locally. And so in some cases we were able to provide equipment and supplies, and particularly around consumables. But the other thing that became very evident was that many of the things we take for granted in the operating theatre, in the surgical setting, would actually be used in the response to COVID itself. So good infection control that, as surgeons, each and every one of you takes absolutely for granted, but it's something you practice, you know, every time you step foot into an OR. That is something that we were actually able to use and roll out into broader communities and to other health settings. And importantly, you know, you all would have seen in any country that you were seeding, you know, the focus on the need for hand washing and what was effectively the surgical scrub. You know, the idea that, you know, good hand hygiene was a way of preventing the transmission of COVID. And so we were able to use some of the learnings that we'd had since our beginning in 1983 and put that into a very, very current setting. But we did need to do more, because what we were hearing from our local partners and our international partners is they needed help, but they needed help in very different ways. So the first thing we did is we established a system that allowed for remote case support. And I'm thrilled to say that not only has this been working well, but it's something that will continue beyond COVID. So once our teams can get in, when they get in, if they get in, and in some cases there will be questions as to whether some of the countries we have traditionally worked, we continue to work. But it allows for a clinician in any one of our partner countries to upload case notes and patient data and video and photos, and for surgeons or anaesthetists or whoever the most relevant clinician is in Australia and New Zealand to review the case and to actually support the surgery planning. Because what we know is that a number of our international partners have access and have the skills to conduct the surgery themselves, but they need some support in the planning of the surgery. And so that's important. The other thing that we have been able to do is fund some independent cases. So where individuals in low-income countries wouldn't be able to access surgery because the cost of healthcare had gone to a level that they simply couldn't support, where there's been an appropriate team in place, we have been able to provide some funding so surgery can still occur, not only so the patient benefits, but also so the surgeon can continue to develop their skills. Because I think you will all agree that the very best thing for development of surgical skill is time spent in the OR. You know, we can give all the training remotely that we like, but there's still a need to take scalpel to skin effectively and to deliver good quality patient outcomes. The other thing that Interplast did, and we ramped up quite quickly, is we launched an online series of education and training. And since the emergence of the pandemic, or in fact since June of last year, we've developed close to and delivered close to 34 webinars across our various education streams to over 2,300 medical professionals within the Asia Pacific region. And interestingly, where Interplast has normally supported 17 countries traditionally, we've had clinicians access our training from across 30 countries. And I provide the link there, so praxhub.com. It is a free platform. You can access it. You sign up with an email address. You can follow the Interplast page, and then from that platform, you will receive access to on-demand footage, so you can watch any one of those webinars at any time that you choose. But also, you will receive notification of upcoming webinars and the like. And so that was something that we were hearing from our international partners for some time, that it would be of benefit, but it proved of further benefit at a time of COVID. The other thing that we've done here, in addition to the sort of what we call the global webinars, so the ones that anyone can come to, we've been really quite specific with some of the sort of structured and tailored offerings that we've made. So, for example, Interplast in Australia and New Zealand for some time has supported a plastic surgery trainee in Bhutan. And so we've been able to work with him through weekly mentoring sessions with a surgeon in Adelaide in Australia, who has actually been doing weekly readings and weekly teaching with him via remote offering, so he can continue his educational training and his training in surgery. It needed to be more than that, though, and I spoke before about Interplast in Australia and New Zealand is more than just direct patient care, and it is more than simply training of clinicians. We also look to change systems, and so some of the things that we've done here is, in partnership with a UK-based entity called Interburns, we actually established a digital assessment tool to assess clinical sort of systems around the treatment of burns. Having piloted that now in a number of countries, we do hope to make that tool available free of charge to every low and middle income hospital in the countries where we work that request it. And it's a way that the hospitals can actually assess whether or not their burns treatment programs are working and whether they're effective. We've been working with governments across the Pacific primarily to look at a plastic surgery curriculum development. So again, touching on the notion that some of the countries where we work will never sustain a plastic surgery unit or team, but can we get some general surgeons skilled to a level where they can provide some basic plastics care? And so can we look there? But also working in other areas, such as in Sri Lanka, to develop a skin bank. So they have access to skin for burns treatment and the like, and that's something that they've requested, and it's something that we've been able to do remotely because it's something that's been we can do during this time. The other thing that we do, and I stress here, we don't send a lot of equipment to countries, but we do send equipment on a couple of occasions when it's requested, and importantly, when it can be serviced and maintained. I think we've all walked into hospital settings, whether it be in a low middle income setting or whether it be in some of the wealthier nations, where you open a supply cupboard and there's all sorts of equipment that's been donated and it's been used, but they haven't provided the consumable probe or something, so it's no longer useful. Interplast is very, very strict on not sending equipment unless there is a supply chain and unless there's a service opportunity. But one of the things that we have done is partner with Lifebox. And so Lifebox is an anaesthetic organisation that provides pulse oximetry and oxygen concentrators and the like to regions. And so obviously through the provision of oxygen at time of COVID, we've been able to do that. And in fact, the most recent shipment of pulse oximeters was to Laos only last week, where we've sent 100 because they were unable to access them through their normal supply chains. All of that's very good, but what does it really mean for the future of humanitarian plastic surgery post-COVID? We've all managed to, use that term, if you like, the pivot during the COVID experience, but what does it mean post-COVID? What does it mean for humanitarian plastic surgery beyond what we know today? I think what it means is that for plastic surgery to work and for global surgery to work well, we actually need to focus in a number of areas. And firstly and foremost, we need localization. So Peter touched on it earlier, but there is absolutely little benefit in a fly-in, fly-out team if there is no training element. And there is also little benefit in a fly-in, fly-out team if they're not there by invitation and if they're not there to perform the tasks that are needed by a number of the partners that are being invited. The reason for that, we actually hear from some of our partners where other surgical teams travel, thankfully not in the plastic space, but where other surgical teams travel, and we get told they breeze in, they take over operating theatres for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month, ultimately preventing local surgery from occurring, and then they fly out, and often the local clinicians aren't even in the room at the table, and that is a real problem. It needs to be built through equitable partnership, and I cannot stress that enough, and it needs to be evidence-based and research-based. And perhaps also importantly, and something overlooked often, is it needs to just consider some basic fundamental rights around child safeguarding and protections. Sadly, we know, as has been the case in the past, where organisations that use this sort of surge model on occasion, sometimes they can do more harm than good. Organisations need to address that, and I'm pleased that places like Australia and New Zealand have mandated child safeguarding principles in place, but it's something that we need to consider as part of the future of plastic surgery and humanitarian care. In real terms, though, Interplast or any of the organisations that are ICOPLAST members, in fact, would traditionally focus on that humanitarian surgery being that blue sort of square on the screen at the moment, which is around treatment and rehab. But to Corstiaan's credit, through some of the work he's doing through Interplast Netherlands, we've often been considered, if you like, as organisations that are the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Well, what if we became the barrier at the top of the cliff? We will never stop burns, but there are a number of preventable burns that we could stop. And if we did things like burns prevention campaigns, run locally, designed to address the core need, things like the replacement of sort of open fire cooking or by putting fire barriers around and the like, all things that would actually prevent some of the need for us to be there in the first place. And I think if we're serious about talking about humanitarian plastic surgery in the future, we actually need to talk also about what comes before our involvement, because only through that can we have really important work. The other thing that we often need to focus on, and sometimes I fear that as providers of global surgery, organisations don't focus on, is what happens post-surgery. Interplast in Australia and New Zealand is very strict in our clinical protocols and our clinical governance around the sorts of treatment that would occur. There is no point doing a complex case if the post-operative care is not sufficient. So what happens post-care, and in fact, what happens around rehab after the patient has been removed from hospital? What happens around ongoing sort of therapy of cleft, so speech therapy? What happens around physiotherapy to prevent the burn contracture from reoccurring? And I think if we're serious about humanitarian surgery, we actually need to look at the continuum of patient care, and surgery providers alone can't do at all, but in fact we shouldn't be doing it unless we can guarantee there are positive patient outcomes at the end. The other thing that we need to consider as organisations is, if you like, the continuum of clinical workforce learning. And so one of the things we've said, and we probably all acknowledge whether we choose to or not, is that not every country will have a sustainable plastics workforce, but every country may have access to clinicians that can add value in the plastic space. No one is advocating for the removal of plastics as a specialty. No one is advocating or suggesting that a general surgeon will be as good or competent in the long term as a fully qualified plastic surgeon in this space. But we need to consider where we work. And so for that reason, perhaps we need to be more open to the idea that we don't have all the answers, and some of the work that we do could be done by others if we were giving them the skills required to do it. And that's a really important consideration. The other thing that we need to consider, obviously, is that good quality patient care doesn't rely solely on a strong clinical workforce. It does need quality hospitals. And so some of the work that Interplast does, again, only at the request of our partner countries, is to actually look at how the hospitals themselves structure. Do they have the organisational capacity to ensure that there is a supportive and a structured surgical unit? Is there good quality data to drive improvements? Are they doing things like capturing data on, infection rates and control and that sort of thing? But perhaps something we often overlook as organisations, whether it be us or in a low-income country, is actually around how involved is the patient in their own care? Are they given clear information, the choice to fully understand what they're undertaking? We've sadly all seen instances where you have a well-meaning surgeon offering surgery, but that may not always be the best interests of the individual because the post-operative care or the follow-up isn't there. And so sadly, sometimes no treatment is the best course of treatment, and the patient has to be fully informed of those decisions, and that's important. We can probably all recognise the World Health Organization's building blocks to a health system framework. And again, I think if we're serious about humanitarian surgery, and particularly in the finance space, service delivery and health workforce is only one part of that. And we have to recognise that perhaps the days of simply flying in to do a cleft lip and palate repair or a burns contracture release, that in itself is not enough. As organisations, and thankfully for us as an organisation, we have looked at those things in the long term over a number of years. But the best thing we could do is to set up a safe and timely exit, because only through that can we be confident that the countries where we are supporting are actually now at a level where they're self-sustaining, and that's important. And for that reason, as an organisation, we are quite proud and quite bold in our approach that by 2030, yes, we will treat an additional 20,000 patients, but largely that will be through some prevention and rehab care as well. It won't all be surgical, although clearly there will be a large surgical component. We are looking to train and fully train an additional 7,500 clinicians across the Asia Pacific region through surgery, anaesthetic, nursing and allied healthcare. We'll work with an additional 125 hospitals to strengthen those units, but our focus will remain on the 20 or so countries where we have lasting long-term relationships. One of the things we will not do as an organisation is actually look to deliver a one-off program. We will only go to a country or to a region where we're invited, and importantly, we will only go where we think it is repeatable and scalable, because there is no question that humanitarian care needs to respond in emergencies. But if we're serious about long-term impact, and if we're serious about long-term benefit, then it needs to be a long-term commitment. And for that reason, Interplast in Australia and New Zealand takes that very, very seriously. And the reason we do that, and I leave you on this slightly unknown source of the quote, but is that real and equitable progress requires exceptional attention to detail and often mundane work of noticing what is invisible to many. As surgeons, we rightly, every surgeon on this call rightly is focused on the patient care. But actually, it's often the things behind the scenes that have the greatest impact. And for that reason, for us, the future of humanitarian plastic surgery may not actually occur in an operating theatre at all. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions and look forward to more of the conversation.
Thank you, Cameron, for such a nice and inspiring presentation. I would like to move to our last but not least speaker, Dr. Simesa Matanaikaki Jr. Simesa, you are with us? Okay. Dr. Simesa holds a Master of Surgery degree from Fiji National University. He was trained as a plastic surgeon in Hobart, Tasmania, and coming back to Fiji, he reestablished a plastic surgery and burns unit at Colonial War Memorial Hospital in Suva, Fiji. Thank you, Semesa, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Horatio. Sorry, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Miko and thank ICOPLAST for inviting me to this symposium. I'm very grateful that you've given us the opportunity to share our experience from Fiji. And I hope that my talk today will inspire or give some feedback to the humanitarian teams who plan visits in future. For those of you who don't know where Fiji is, we're in the South Pacific Ocean here above New Zealand, beside Australia, amongst many other smaller South Pacific islands, Vanuatu and Tonga. Fiji has about 300 islands, only 200 are inhabited. We have a population of under 1 million, roughly 900,000. Most of the population reside in 2 of the bigger islands, Honolulu here on the left, and Viti level. We have 2 outer islands which are further away from the Fiji group, Rotuma, which is about 600 kilometers north, and Onela, which is about 400 kilometers south, divided by ocean. In Fiji, our health system is divided into 3 areas. We have the Northern Division in Honolulu, we have the Western Division, and then we have the Eastern Division, all of which have a major hospital and are able to carry out tertiary care. This is CWM Hospital where I'm posted at. It's in the capital city of Suva. It's also the main referral hospital of Fiji, and it has various of the other disciplines in surgery which are not available in the other 2 centers. When you think about Fiji, most people know Fiji to be a tourist place with wonderful beaches and lovely sunshine. And a lot of people know us for our rugby, which we're passionate about, having won our only gold medal at the 2016 Rio Olympics. Interplast and Fiji, as Cameron said, I apologize, this might be a repetition to Cameron's talk, but Fiji was the second country visited after Interplast was established in 1983. In 2010, it marks the 100th visit to Fiji. Since then, Interplast, as Cameron had also mentioned, has evolved in the way they provide aid to most of the Pacific nations, especially here in Fiji. My first exposure to plastic surgery came about with Dr. Semesa, the late Dr. Semesa Sr., who did his studies in New Zealand and returning back to Fiji in 1990. He established the unit in Fiji with much difficulty. He had the support with Interplast, and in the Interplast team, he had a lot of his classmates like Mark Klassen from New Zealand and John de Goose, who also came out and helped him with a number of his cases here in Fiji. From 2003 to 2014, most of the plastic cases like cleft lip and palates, burns, contractures, complex hand injuries were done mostly by the Interplast volunteers. And I was very fortunate to be mentored by a lot of them, especially Dr. Simon Thompson on your right. I was also fortunate to have mentorship from other surgeons who were sponsored by the PIP program and the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons. We had visits by ENT surgeon, Dr. Suren Krishnan, MaxFax surgeons, Dr. Suni and Professor Rob Jones, and also an orthopedic hand surgeon, Dr. Stuart Myers from Sydney. So all of this gave me the surgical skills that I need to develop to do the cases that we had in Fiji. It was Dr. Simon, who really saw something in me. I'm not really sure to this day what he saw, but he invited me back to Australia to spend a couple of years and learn some more about plastic surgery. I hope to gain his wisdom one day. And as a lot of you have been talking about, I think this is one of the aims of most of the humanitarian aids, to give a man teach a man to fish so he can feed him for a lifetime. And I think that's the way that Interplast has evolved, as Cameron had said. In Australia, I had the benefit of working under these consultants and learning that what I learned in Fiji was only the tip of the iceberg in plastic surgery. There are other fields that I didn't know about microsurgery, breast augmentations, aesthetic surgery. And these are the skills I had to quickly develop before coming back to Fiji. Whilst in Australia, I was fortunate to be part of a live cadaver dissection course. This was greatly funded by Interplast and the University of Tasmania. They invited not only me, but also surgeons from around the Pacific to take part in this fresh cadaver course, which was held in Tasmania. We had candidates from as far as Kiribati, Samoa, Solomons, Vanuatu, and also Tonga. Although the course was excellent course, the weather was not too kind to some of us from the Pacific Islands who are used to warm weather. Going back home would be the biggest challenge. As Dr. Peter Nathumba had mentioned, in a lot of the developing countries, we have a lot of challenging things ahead of us in terms of infrastructure, consumables, but also pathology. The other challenging thing is how you fit into your surgical unit, whether they will accept this new discipline or not. My first plastic clinic was a bit disappointing. I had only 2 patients to see. It was until I saw the patients and I realized how complex the pathologies were. We had a gentleman with a SEC scalp mass with a nodal metastasis and a lady with a BCC in the right upper limb. So after planning and doing the appropriate investigations, we planned for surgery. This was kind of the do or die moment for me as a person bringing back a new specialty to the country. After a successful operation of wide local excision and careful neck dissection, I slowly noticed that I started getting more and more referrals from my other colleagues. A 26-year-old gentleman with a left cheek mass presented to my clinic. The TrueCut biopsy came back as aggressive fibromatosis. As Peter had said, one of the things that we are also faced with in the developing countries is that you don't have the luxury of being part of a multidisciplinary team. Sometimes you might have to be the surgeon who is responsible for resection as well as reconstruction. So at times you try to pick up the thing that does the reconstruction the easiest, does the job and is faster and gives you time to rest afterwards as well. So after wide local excision, we had a defect of the inner buccal area and also the outer skin area, and just using a supraclavicle flap and a temporalis flap for the maxillectomy defect, the patient did well afterwards. The next thing I noticed that I started getting referrals from other disciplines which didn't know where to go. So we started taking over all the wound adhesions post cardiothoracic surgeries. These were humanitarian visits for cardiothoracic surgeries in Fiji, and I was fortunate to learn some of the reconstructive or treatments of the surgical site infections that happened to these cases. So we started doing all our own abdominal rectus flaps, waistcoat flaps, pec major flaps. And before I knew it, I was operating from head to toe. One of the great things that we had also taken on board as a local team is to treat our own local, our own cleft lip and palate patients. With the cleft initiative in 2013, the team before I arrived had decided to make a multidisciplinary team. And when I arrived in 2014, I was able to fit well with the team. So we have an ENT surgeon who does all our grommets for palate repairs. He's a volunteer from South Korea. He's also in the process of teaching our local surgeons, teaching our local ENT surgeons. Unfortunately, we don't have a speech therapist, and we rely heavily on the speech therapists who come as volunteers from Interplast from Australia and New Zealand. In 2014, we had a microscope donated to us, and this was due to the great work of Simon Thompson and Frank Kimball. And then with it, Interplast were able to ship it across to Fiji. We were able to perform our first free flap in 2014, which added on to our armamentarium of reconstructive tools. What I thought was our first free flap, I later realized after speaking to David Campbell that he may have done another free flap on one of the Interplast visits, hence stealing my thunder. So with the microscope, we are fortunate to do this, treat this gentleman with full thickness electrical burns. We were able to provide a latissimus flap with skin graft to his defect, which had done well. Unfortunately, there was some infection to the reconstruction, which was treated appropriately, but otherwise he's back at home. One of the things that Interplast changed over the years is that they decided to have a country coordinator. So as Simon Thompson was one of the gentlemen responsible for taking me across to Australia, he became the country coordinator for Fiji. And slowly he designated surgeons to be responsible for particular areas in Fiji. Even though it's still a small population, we still have a lot of work to do, and sometimes the work catches up to what you're able to carry out in a week. Although we are doing a lot of cases on our own, we still needed some help from some of the surgeons who are more experienced. We had a baby with a tertiary 3 facial cleft, which Mr. Frank Kimball came over to Fiji and showed me his approach to these types of congenital defects. While at one of the conferences, I was asked by Interplast, how can we better help you Fiji, semester in Fiji? And then with all the cases we were doing, I realized there was a big void in our health system, that I didn't have a team around me that could support me. After doing the first free flap at home, I had to stay back for about 5 hours, making sure that the flap was well perfused. It was the following year that I asked that we hold a nurses conference to help teach our nurses about free flap monitoring, burns wound monitoring. And so Interplast went on to developing other areas of the surgical team. CWM is one of the teaching hospitals, and it's responsible for registers or surgical registers from all over the Pacific. As I said, we have people from East Timor, Tonga, Samoa. And so when they come to Fiji, they're learning to be surgical trainees. With the help of Interplast, what we've done, as Cameron had said, is try to teach general surgeons to have plastic surgical skills. So a simple trotters hand workshop in which we taught them how to repair tendons, and then slowly concentrating on 4 core tendon repairs using the tendons from the pig's trotters. So we had, with the other volunteers of Interplast, we had done many workshops over the years, and training our registers as well as registers from other nations in the Pacific. The other thing that we are fortunate to have is the support of ANSBA, through Interplast, and they provided a lot of training for burns in Fiji, as well as the rest of the Pacific. We held emergency management of severe burns courses here in Fiji, again with registers of trainees from Solomons, from PNG, from all around the Pacific. The other thing they helped us do was try and get our burns nurses across overseas to some of the conferences, present at the conferences, and also spend some time at the local burns unit, learning some new skills that they would bring back home. As I said earlier, one of the things that really helped our surgical patients was the post-operative care. And this was carried out largely due to the help of Interplast and Ministry of Health. And then slowly, the locals team started doing our own surgical training. As you can see, we have our surgical ENT volunteer helping out in the ENT or tracheostomy care. We had our own local anesthetist helping out in airway care in terms of burns management. So throughout a year, we'd probably have 2 to 3 sessions of nursing workshops. I guess one of the biggest dilemmas to one of the mentors who come abroad from a high income country to a low income country, should he be teaching cosmetic surgery or aesthetic surgery? I was fortunate that one of my mentors felt that it was not just about filling the defect, but also making it pleasing to the eye. So in his eyes, reconstruction and aesthetics was part of the same thing. You had to reconstruct something, but also make it pleasing to the eye. However, blood supply before beauty. I leave this to the future mentors on what they deem as necessary to teach the developing nations. But I guess a simple formula would be crawl, walk, and run. Teach the basics first before they start running. So we had this lady who presented to us with a chest wall mass, which she's had for a couple of months. Initially, she presented to the medical unit with pleural effusion. So she had shortness of breath, orthopnea, and she was investigated for what might be a malignant pleural effusion. Her cytology aspirates came back negative for malignancy, and she was passed around the surgical unit until we had a discussion about her in our MDT session. So a true-cut biopsy was done of this tumor, and it came back as a giant cell tumor. So the plan at this stage was to just do a simple mastectomy and excise the chest wall mass en bloc. However, the patient refused and referred to keep her breast rather than lose it through a mastectomy. So we had to come up with a better plan. Using a Weiss pattern technique and using the superior middle pole to supply the nipple areal complex, I was able to excise the whole mass with this tissue on the lower quadrant of the breast. Excising the mass and cutting off 4 ribs, we could see inside that the mass was still attached to some lung, so we had to resect a part of the lung. So in this diagram, you have the diaphragm, lung that's been sewed, and the pericardium. After making the plan in your head about this case, you know that the surgery would be okay, but one of our most challenging parts in our setting would be the post-operative care. And that's what Interplast had worked. What we had worked hard on was the post-operative care. The chest wall was reconstructed with the polypropylene mesh, titanium plates, and a lithosphere flap was placed over it to provide a cover, a watertight seal. We have a photo here before the dressings on the right, and our photo 1 year later of her wounds. The tumor came back as a giant cell tumor, widely excised. So, as I had said earlier, prior to doing the operation, The importance of the post-surgery care was stressed to the team as well as our physiotherapists. And this was, she was treated aggressively post-op and she recovered well without any complications. The other thing that the Interplast has done is also provide mentorship for the other allied staff that we have. So we had a case of a fractured humerus with a radial nerve pulse in which we did tendon transfers. So a big part of this was our rehabilitation. So Akisi spent long hours with Jenny Ball trying to make a rehabilitation pathway for our patient. And the video seen early on in his rehabilitation process. Vision for the Pacific, whether it should be a mission model versus the teach a man to fish principle. Unfortunately, the Pacific is a bit different than other LMCI lower to middle income countries in the sense that we are a smaller population, but we are divided by a large ocean. For example, an extreme case would be Kiribati, which has a population of 119,000, but is spread across an area mass of 1.4 million square miles, which is roughly the size of India. And as I had said earlier, the far islands of Fiji, which can be reached previously by fixed air, which takes about 3 hours. So surgery in the Pacific has been limited to life-threatening conditions, acute abdomens, intracranial bleeds, sepsis, and trauma may be treated conservatively with dressings and healing, probably by secondary intention. So one of my mentors also mentioned, plastic surgery is a way of thinking. And every time he taught the registers from the other countries, he said he's not teaching them to be plastic surgeons, but to give them good surgical skills that will help them in their career. And I think, as Cameron had said, that some of our countries in the Pacific have a small population, and perhaps the way to go is just train general surgeons to have some of these skills. So just looking at what's happening in the Pacific, and I think what might be evolving around in the world as well, I think Interplast have come up with a good blueprint. They've identified country coordinators for each island in the Asia-Pacific region. They provided mentoring and regular support. There's a multidisciplinary approach now in teaching the whole team and not just the surgeon. And there's also education about plastic surgery happening in the local setting. Unfortunately, plastic surgery in a lot of our countries in the Pacific is looked upon as an elective discipline. And however, if we look at all the operations that is covered under plastic surgery, it is trauma, it is malignancies, it is burns. So these make up about 66% of all of the world disability adjusted life year surgeries. I'm just looking at one of the articles by Mimi and Borelli in the World Journal of Plastic Surgery. It talks greatly about the role of plastic surgery in global health. So in summary, humanitarian plastic surgery can be either a service provider, which depends on population, local capabilities in terms of HR, or can begin as a service provider with the aim to switch over to the teach a man to fish principle. And again, you need to identify local partners, build local support for the person, continue the method support, and provide support in terms of equipment and consumables. I'd just like to thank Interplast for all the work they've done, all the volunteers they've had provided to us. And I'd like to thank ICOPLAST again for the opportunity to present at this forum. I'd like to thank all the surgeons or those responsible for providing humanitarian aid around the world. And I hope my presentation has just will give you some insight into how better to provide your services. Thank you.
Thank you, Semesa, for sharing for us such a remarkable history of your professional life, and very inspiring indeed. I would like to move to Miko so we can start with the Q&A session.
Thanks, Horatio, and thank you to all our speakers for their incredibly inspiring and informative talks. For me personally, involvement with work with Interplast and our sessions now recently over Zoom with Semesa and his colleagues in the Pacific have been extremely rewarding, and probably one of the proudest things that I've done in my professional career. Semesa, just may I start with you? I'm curious to hear your vision for education and providing support to LMICs around the world. What is your take on global academic surgery, and how would you see a role for organizations not just like Interplast but also ICOPLAST? ICOPLAST represents the plastic surgery society, most plastic surgery societies in the world. We would, for example, be able to facilitate sending trainees in their later stages of training to developing nations or low-income areas where they can not only teach some of their skills from their countries, but I'm sure they can also learn very much from places where they go. I know every time I speak with you and every time I see your presentations, I'm humbled, and I actually learn at least as much as I try and teach you guys. So what would you see as a besides Zoom and hopefully in the post-COVID era could be a new model for education in academic plastic surgery around the world?
Well, I like the definition that Peter Nathumba gave regarding academic surgery, and which I feel is very important part of the humanitarian aid given. Just stressing on the point that speaking in the Pacific, where we are a smaller populated area, and just emphasizing what Cameron said, that I don't think you'll be able to develop plastic surgeons, but if you can develop general surgeons with plastic skills and skills, to skin graft burns, prevent hand contractures, or probably deal with tendon repairs, then I think you've actually covered a lot of the things that they encounter. And just looking at that paper by looking at plastic surgery and its effect on global health, I think one of the important things is educating local support for the surgeon. One of the things when I hear the other doctors going back is that it's looked at as an elective procedure and there's no place in it for their surgical team, which is quite unfortunate, as you see that the magnitude of things that we encounter in the developing countries are actually things that are covered by plastic surgery. If you take away the cleft lip and palates, but you have there the hand trauma. Hand trauma in Fiji takes about 70% of our workload. So that alone keeps us busy. apart from the low limb defects and head and neck tumors. But if you just concentrate on hand traumas and burns, then you've covered a great deal of caseload.
And have you seen support from Interplast on this policy and governmental level? I know Cameron, maybe you want to touch on this. How successful do you think you've been in getting, aiding hardworking doctors like Semessa and getting the political support they need on the ground for the work they do?
Yeah, Miko, I think, I was going to say, I think if we could solve that challenge, we would actually solve many of the challenges facing surgery, full stop, including in higher income countries as well. What I would say is, we have had some success, but there is a long way to go. And, to Dr. Semessa's point, plastic surgery, unfortunately, is often seen as an elective or even as a cosmetic practice, and that, as we all know, is not the full picture. But it is something that we need to be looking at, and certainly from a from a advocacy and sort of standpoint around governments, even just changing some of the language that is used will be important. But I think also too, we have to acknowledge, rightly or wrongly, that many of the governments that we're dealing with, surgery is only one of the challenges they face, and plastic surgery is only one of the challenges they face as well. And to Semessa's point, one of the things that we do need to look at is sort of the entire clinical workforce, and that's not just relevant to plastic surgery. And so I think, for us, getting governments to look at longer term sustainability of their workforce is the greatest challenge. If you look to Semessa, and to your point, Miko, and Semessa is a very humble man, it is safe to say he's a leading plastic surgeon now. He is an incredibly talented surgeon performing some exceptional surgeries with amazing patient outcomes. He would be just as, at home at any major trauma centre in Australia or New Zealand. And that in itself is a challenge, because, Semessa Junior, sadly we lost Semessa Senior. He is the only plastic surgeon in Fiji, and he's in fact the only plastic surgeon in a large part of the Pacific. Until we can convince governments to support a longer term strategy, it's always a high risk proposition. And I suspect, Peter may have a different view because there's a larger population, but I suspect surgical workforce sort of planning is a challenge, and governments traditionally haven't bought into that.
Yeah, that's obviously a challenge, and probably a worldwide challenge. Peter, are you still with us? Are you still awake, or have you been called in to do another replan? But I'm curious, Peter, would you be able to comment on Semessa's presentation? I'm sure you see parallels in your practice, being equally busy and challenged, but also what would you say to Cameron's comment on our challenges faced in our dealings with government and administration?
Thanks, and Semessa, it's great to see you. Although your beard makes you look different. We met briefly in Fiji about a year before the clamp down on travel was my first visit. Beautiful country, a little scaring flying over all that water. But anyway, it's a good question. I have to agree that given the number of plastic surgeons, even in the COSEXA region, we actually have been working with PSF, Plastic Surgery Foundation, US, with a view to empowering general surgeons and orthopedic surgeons to do some of the basic plastic surgery procedures, do them well. So, you know, you have a skin graft take of 50%, is that acceptable? Of course it's not. And so one of the thoughts that we brought up is creating centers of excellence where, you know, like Semesa's referral hospital, although just having one hospital, that really kills. But being able to spread, say you have a hospital that does well in orthopedic surgery, so pushing that hospital up to where it would serve a larger region. I think that's the way we're going to have to go. My biggest problem is what they call non-physician surgeons. But I was a general surgeon for many years doing a lot of plastic surgery myself. Obviously, I did not have the same comfort or results, outcomes as I prefer to think I have right now. Yeah. So I think I was trained as a general surgeon, so that the important thing about being safe and being accessible, I think is useful. I think the other bit for Semesa, I guess, is this flying out thing in like the islands. We in Kenya, for example, a professional society does do the surgical missions, but we always do it in concert with a member of our society, so that we are able to support them and sometimes actually ship patients over to centers where we can take care of. The other bit I have, unfortunately, the government is full of red tape. Ministry of Health. Semesa has a great minister of health. I really envy him. But yeah, we don't have that access. And so it makes things difficult. And so working through professional groups and then moving back to the Ministry of Health, at least in our part of the world, that's how it works the best. Going through the ministry will take you 10, 15 years before you break through. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think we probably see a common theme with these presentations in the value of collaboration and support through non-governmental organizations, government, local surgeons, and allied health professionals. I wonder, Corstiaan, whether you would comment on the value of integrating this type of work in training programs, both from high-income countries and low-income countries. I think we can all learn so much from each other. And would it maybe be one route to a more sustainable and longer-term development? You know, so many surgeons in the high-income countries would cite a limit, and I'm thinking without considering COVID, but in the length of time that they can travel, and maybe some of our trainees would be willing and able to spend 6 to 12 months in low-income countries, and that would be a great way to exchange knowledge both ways and have some kind of more sustainable connection. What would you think about that sort of model?
Well, first of all, I honestly believe that you can really learn from each other. I also think that the pathology is a little bit different, and you have to have a certain amount of background in the country before you can give them advice. So I do not think everybody, speaking about Corona times or from a distance away, so I think you have to have a certain amount of background to be able to give advice from a high income country to a low income country. I do believe that there's a real added benefit. You know, people from high income countries going to low income countries for the training, but also the other way around. So I think we really have to look at things from in a bi-directional way. How can we learn from each other? I do also think that it's probably not applicable to everybody. So I'm not 100% sure how we can incorporate that in a global health way of teaching, but I definitely do think that we, and I think it's an important way forward for us to help each other. And I must say, Corona has opened up doors. Like I said, with those 4K glasses of mine, I definitely think that is different. That is a new way how we can learn from each other. And you know, I can sit behind my screen in the Netherlands and assist somebody in Kijabi doing a pharyngeoplasty or something else, and you can. You know, what we're doing in the Netherlands, we are dividing, and I'm sure many other countries as well, dividing surgeries in different in different sections, and then you give the resident a score on how well he does that specific operation. For instance, you would divide a surgery into 10 different steps, and then you know those are ways that everybody can learn from each other. So yes, most definitely, I'm not 100% sure exactly how it will work, because I know what you're saying about, you know, having surgeons from the States going to low-income country general surgeons doing global surgery work when they, during their residency, and these were surgeons doing the residency in the States, they look later, and many of them did not do any global surgery later on anymore. So people go to a low-income country, have it during their training, and they might not use it anymore. So I'm not 100% sure how we should apply that yet, but the question, yes, do I think that there's applicability? You know, is it valuable? Yes, but how exactly? I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if that gives an answer, Miko.
Yeah, well, it definitely does, Corstiaan. Obviously, this is an evolving conversation. And those 4K glasses, I think we have a question from Leo, just asking you quickly, what are they actually? What you did say the brand or the name?
Yeah, well, it's actually it looks a little bit like Google Glass, but there's definitely a difference. The company's it's a fairly new company. They're called Rods and Cones, and I know that Ethicon, you know, Johnson & Johnson just bought many of them for distribution in low-income countries. So it's sounds like it could be interesting for lots of work, especially for us as plastic surgeons. You know, there's so many tips and tricks that we can teach each other, and it's something that I, you know, I'm starting to look even for myself. You know, looking back at surgeries, you know, how you can improve yourself.
Yeah. And it's interesting also to see some parallels with Samessa and Peter's work. Peter showed a case of perforator flap used on the lower limb, and we've been talking with Samessa and his colleagues in the Pacific on Zoom. We've been doing some teachings from Tasmania to the Pacific on perforator flaps, and allowing or you know, giving all the tips and tricks that we have on surgeries that can be carried out without needing a surgical microscope, and you know, you get away with so many things without doing free flaps. And then perhaps these glasses would be another opportunity to give those tips. Horacio, do you have any parallels from or your viewpoint from South America? I know that the training programs in South America have really evolved a lot over the last 50, 60 years. Is there much outreach? Do trainees and their mentors travel to rural areas and to lower income areas in your part of the world?
Thank you, Nico, for your question. Yes, you know, it's funny, but we are at my department. We are starting our first humanitarian mission to another rural area in the Salta province, in the it's a northwestern province in Argentina, near the frontier with Bolivia. And my resident just came back today. He was there during a whole week during consultations. So we have a foundation over here that is a foundation for the advancement of surgery and the burns treatment that all the members from my department are founder members. And we have donated an oven for sterilized instruments to be used during surgeries in this tiny hospital near the frontier with Bolivia. And true is that there are not too many humanitarian missions in plastic surgery in Argentina provided by Argentinian plastic surgeons. Just they are not that popular. The truth is that in this part of the world, Latin America, unfortunately, plastic surgeons they are more interested in making money, and you know they are not interested in participating in humanitarian missions, and that's why sometimes, like we witnessed humanitarian mission from Rotaplast in Argentina, providing plastic surgery to in different provinces in our country, and the same happened in the rest of Latin America. For instance, we were talking before the beginning of this symposium with Corstiaan about the humanitarian mission in Peru. The truth is that Peru has, and many other Latin American countries nowadays, they have very good plastic surgeons. But unfortunately, they are not interested in participating in these missions, at least in their home countries. So perhaps they got involved in working in another missions in Africa or in other countries, but not in their own countries. So, so I am really happy to tell you that we are really, so that's why the idea, this was your idea, you know. I told you, Miko, I want to organize the first Oceania ICOPLAST symposium, and you told me a great topic is humanitarian plastic surgery, and I agree right away. So I already had the idea of organizing humanitarian plastic surgeries mission in my country. So nowadays, I have one of my residents there. He's actually a foreign resident from Colombia. His name is Rainer Garcia. He was the first one in getting involved. Actually, he got in touch with a person from the university affiliated to my hospital, who was in charge of organizing this kind of mission in other fields of medicine, like pediatrics and internal medicine. Actually, had his idea, and we are really encouraged. So for me, all these presentation tonight or this morning for you has been very inspiring, and we hope also to start working with ICOPLAST. I know that there are people from many countries that are very interested in participating under the umbrella of ICOPLAST in humanitarian missions. And I think that we have Scott Corlew in our team. Unfortunately, he was unable to attend today, but I think that we start thinking, and also ICOPLAST get actively involved in providing assistance and connecting people interested in working overseas again in their own countries, because I noticed that there are people that are interested to work in other countries, but I think that there are people living in low and middle income countries should we start at home, we should start working in our own countries, providing our services for free. I mean, this is really rewarding, and there is a moment that you need anything else to fill your life. And so because of all of this, I think that today or tonight, for me, this has been really, really rewarding, and I hope to share with all of you the results of our first missions in Argentina soon.
Thank you so much, Horatio, and for me as well, this has been very, very inspiring and really rewarding. Thank you for your opportunity to organize this symposium and to ask me to do that, and thank you for your help. Our speakers have really gone above and beyond, I think, and have truly delivered world-class and inspiring talks. I wonder whether there are any questions from our attendees. If you have a question, please, you can use the raise your hand function on Zoom, and then we can also bring you into the discussion and allow you to talk. We still have a few more minutes we can use. So if any panelists would like, or any attendees would like to ask a question, just press the raise your hand button in your Zoom window. I would also really like to thank those around the world who stayed up late or skipped a night of sleep. It's always hard to find the best time zone. I'm lucky now I got to pick the time myself. Usually the ICOPLAST board meetings are very early or very late for me. So now it was my turn to together with Horatio to decide the time. Horatio, do you have any questions you would like to ask the speakers?
Yeah, I would like to ask Corstiaan. I think it's his presentation regarding the use of four key glazes. I think this is wonderful. I think the possibility of being a proctor miles away, I think it's a great advancement, and I think that nowadays the technology, the internet communication with the 5G technology, I think that it really makes it possible to have a real-time input, for a surgeon that is proctoring a surgery in another country. So I would like to ask Corstiaan about if these glasses, they are available, which is the cost. I mean, this technology is affordable for third world countries?
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Well, it's obviously available. Yes, I must be honest. It's relatively new in the Netherlands. I don't have any shares with the company, so I wish maybe I had, but I don't. But so they are in a process of selling them. So they don't actually sell the glasses; they lease the glasses, so that you pay amount per year. and then every year you get new glasses with new software updates. And it's a company that, like I said, basically they were initiated last year, it's. I'm sure there must be other companies as well, because it's not new, but so I don't know 100% what the costs are. The company came to me and they said, Corstiaan, we are developing this. Would you mind thinking with us on how we can improve our zoom lens and how we can improve, what are the problem areas? And I know that in the Netherlands, they also went to trauma surgeons, to cardiac surgeons. And I definitely know, because I've spoken to them, and they are definitely willing to donate glasses to people working in low and middle income countries. Now, I specifically went to them telling them about Interplast Holland operating in 9 areas, so they were keen to share that. I'm not sure how far they will go worldwide, but it's definitely, they are definitely open to discussion. So I think it's definitely something that we can pursue.
Wonderful. So that is something like the Google Glass, when Google launched these glasses for recording during, is the technology is similar, I mean.
Yeah, I to be honest, I was never involved with the Google glasses. They never really took off in the Netherlands. I'm not 100% sure why, but it's I don't know if there's somebody else that has maybe helped or used Google glasses before. I know that Interplast did use some Google glasses. They tried using Google glasses to instruct cleft lip surgery. But I don't know why it was never a big hit. I don't know if there's somebody else that's listening maybe that says, they know exactly why it didn't work.
And do you think that, curiously, last week we had a journal club, the EJPS journal club, with one of your countrymen, Tom Balmuken, he developed a microsurgery robot in University of Maastricht University. And so do you think that this robotic technology, with the 5G technology could help in these countries, to perform very, 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 very difficult cases involving microsurgery? Do you think that this robotic surgery also, it is related with your 4K glasses? Do you think that this technology could be helpful in these missions?
Yeah, well, I know that this technology can be attached. This 4K camera, it's obviously, it's like we're looking on a screen now. The microscope can be attached as well, so you can assist somebody in the same way. So you can use your glasses, you can take them off, and you connect your microscope, and somebody can still assist you. I know there was surgery done in London 2-3 weeks ago that somebody used these same glasses. I think it was from the States, assisting somebody doing some cardiothoracic surgery. So it's complex surgeries can be done in this way, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Horatio, I think I might just let Wael from Egypt talk. He put his hand up. So quick question from Egypt. So Wael, you can unmute yourself and then you can speak.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm speaking from Egypt. I have to thank the speakers for the wonderful missions they did. I'm just wondering when it is expected to resume these Interplast missions after the COVID vaccination, or after the COVID epidemic or pandemic is going to vanish, I hope. So I want it is expected to have a date of resuming these missions again. And the second question, for the 4K glasses, if we can get in our hospital, for example, one of these glasses, either through the company as a help to the LMIC, or if we can get it on our own, how can we get in contact with some surgeons to share in our complicated surgery? Thank you.
Corstiaan, I'll let you answer this question on the glasses, and then I might just get Cameron's comment on when we might expect to resume some face-to-face missions. Thanks for your question, Wael.
Thank you.
Good question. Well, like I said in the beginning, there's this company that is making these glasses, and they're trying to distribute them. And Ethicon, and I know that Johnson & Johnson is obviously big in Africa as well. They are collaborating with this company, and I know that they are thinking about distributing them in Africa. So I'm not sure, this is an ongoing process. I'm not sure exactly when they want to do it, but maybe we should stay in contact, and then maybe I can bring you in contact with the Ethicon representative in Africa. Hopefully they can help us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, over to you, Cameron.
Yeah, thanks, Miko, and thanks for the question. And look, sadly, the response is not going to be what any of us probably want to hear, in the sense of from an Interplast Australia and New Zealand point of view. So our sort of thoughts about heading back into the Asia Pacific region. We don't actually anticipate any visiting teams within the next 9 to 12 months. Circulating across the region, and sadly, I have to say, I think our Asian partner countries will be further away than our Pacific countries, just while they continue to get the virus under control. That said, certainly as we're starting to see higher rates of vaccines occur, both within low-income nations through initiatives such as COVAX, and certainly our own clinicians getting vaccinated, there is hope. We will return. It's not a case that we're never going back. It's just, it won't be a short-term solution. Because I think the other thing that we have to genuinely consider as organisations that provide humanitarian care, just because we can go back doesn't mean we should be back at the first opportunity, and it doesn't mean we should be the first ones in line to go back. And I think, as I've said throughout today and often say, we will respond to partner requests if and when they come up. But, someone like Samessa may actually say, well, the first thing we need is an orthopedic visiting team, and the last thing we need is plastics. I hope he doesn't. I'd be judging him if he does. But no. See, if that's the need, some of us won't be back for some time. So I think it really has to depend on what the country says and what our partners say. But sadly, it's not in the short term.
Thanks very much, Cameron. That actually brings us to a good segue with what our role maybe should be is responding to requests from the low-income countries and listening to what they need, as opposed to blitzing in and out. And I think that is a common theme that we're seeing here, and one that is especially echoed by the presentations we've seen from Peter and Samessa. Now we're nearing the end. It's 2 minutes before 12 local time in Tasmania. I would like to wrap things up and again thank our panelists and my co-chair Horatio for their incredible contributions today. The symposium has been recorded by the ICOPLAST office. I'm not exactly sure how or when a recording could be made available to watch again. But we'll try and get that information on the ICOPLAST website. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Again, this has been a great opportunity and a great honor, and I'm sure this will just be the start of a revolution in the type of work that we're doing for the low income countries around the world. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Miko. Congratulations. Well done.
It's been a great symposium.
Thanks, Horatio.